Hey everybody, you have come to, what? Oh yeah, my husband is helping me today. Thomas is in the background. We have 5 kids at home. We're like you guys. We're making the best of a crazy situation, and I hope that this helps. I know that just based talking with friends and other people, a lot of people are wondering about a few basic things, and bread is definitely one of them. Bread is a staff of life, and it has been for always. So knowing how to make really simple homemade bread, it just adds a lot of depth to your day. It adds great, it's a great thing to add to a meal. It's easy to use. You can make sandwiches. You can serve it hot with butter and jam. You can serve it on the side with soup or other things. And one of our favorite things to do with homemade bread is to make French toast. It's an easy thing to do in the morning. So this is my mom's recipe. I don't know if you ever grew up in the Midwest, but we made family or church cookbooks. So this recipe, it's on my site. You can find it at blessismesplease.com, and if you search for Mom's whole wheat bread or Mom's 4-loaf wheat bread, it's going to be on there, whole thing, tips, tricks, everything. But I just use it right out of the book. Me and my sister redid this one. My aunts had one in the 80s. We updated it in 2008, so I love this recipe. This recipe can make 4 loaves of bread at one time. That's a lot of bread. It freezes really well, and I'll tell you some about that. But if you want to cut it in half, it's super easy to do too. So I'm doing a half recipe because I've already made it a few times so that you can see the stages. So I'm going to have about 6 loaves of bread when I'm done today. You just start with 2 cups of warm water. I picked this recipe to share because it does not have milk, it doesn't have eggs, it doesn't have butters. This is really, really staple things and has a lot of flexibility. So the 2 cups of warm water, you're just going to want warm tap water that isn't super hot, because if it's too hot, it can actually kill the organisms that are part of the yeast. And then I'm going to do 1 tablespoon of yeast, and if you bought the yeast in the little packets, just use 1 packet. They're similar. It's a hair less in a packet, but for this recipe, it doesn't matter. And then I do a 1/4 cup of oil and a 1/4 cup of sugar.
They wonder if they can just come buy it from you.
Oh yeah, come buy it. You're fine. I have 6 loaves now. I figured I'd doorbell ditch some from my neighbors.
I think they're talking about the yeast.
Oh, the yeast. Yes, do you need yeast? I'll mail it to you. So for the 1/4 cup of oil, you can do melted butter, you can do canola, you can do vegetable, you can do grapeseed, you can do avocado, you can even use olive oil, even though it has quite a bit of flavor, because it doesn't have tons in the recipe. So you have tons of flexibility when it comes to the fat in this recipe. I added the sugar. You can also use honey if you have it. And then salt. It's a full 2 teaspoons. Salt really adds a lot to bread, so don't go skimpy there. So those are the main things. We had water, sugar, yeast, salt, oil. And then when it comes to the flour, you have a lot of flexibility too. If you have bread flour, it will work. If you have all-purpose flour, it will work. If you have whole wheat flour, it will work. If you have whole wheat pastry flour, it will all work. And I'm going to show you how flexible it is. So I like to do half whole wheat and half white the best. And I just have these giant buckets. This is not me prepping. This is how I cook. I cook enough that I have giant buckets. So you need about 6 cups of flour, but I'm not measuring it specifically because I want you to get a feel for the dough. So I'm going to add my whole wheat flour first because it absorbs the most water. So I generally like about 2 cups of whole wheat flour. I'm going to stir it. So my mom calls this the cake batter stage, and we're just going to stir it quite a bit with the whole wheat flour until it's really, really soupy. And this is giving the whole wheat flour time to absorb the water. You see how it's thicker already? You guys, this is our first live. Can you tell? Okay, so we're at the cake batter stage, and I would stir it here for a minute. This is a great thing. Get your kids involved in this one. My kids help me make bread very often. Okay, and now that's my whole wheat, and so I did, if you need 5 to 6 cups, I did 2 cups of whole wheat. I feel like that's a really good ratio. If you're doing more whole wheat, you're going to add less flour than the full 6 cups because it absorbs more of the moisture. So I am going to add...
Someone's asking, what are you making? They must
I'm making my mom's wheat bread. And it's super simple, and I will put the recipe link in just a bit. Do you see how it's starting to come together? You don't need a mixer, you just need a little elbow grease. So it's still very thin. If you were to dump this on your counter, it's still a bit of a mess. So I'm just gonna add maybe half of my little thing of flour. Can you come over more? Or can you see it well? Okay, do you see how it's starting to form a ball and come away from the edges? This is when it's more manageable. Okay, so it's kind of coming out. I'm gonna deal with that on my counter now. So I'm going to flour this very well because I still have a lot. I've probably only added 4 cups, maybe only 3.5 cups of the flour, so I have a lot of flour that I'm still going to add. I just scrape out my bowl, see how it kind of sticks to the spoon. And I have a lot on my spoon, so just get your hands floury and use that to scrape it off. See how it's not too much on my hands? Like it's there a little bit, but not crazy. So we just keep the flour coming. And then we're gonna work on kneading. See how it's already sticking? You have a lot of flour you can add. So I'm gonna add all of this because I know that I'm gonna need it. So here's how my mom taught me to knead. You fold, you smash, quarter turn. You fold, you smash, you quarter turn. Do you see it? And all the while I'm adding my flour back in because it's going to stick to that and then it's getting folded inside of it. We're incorporating a lot of flour during this process. And this is why you don't need a stand mixer if you are willing to knead. So if you had a stand mixer, this is when you would be gradually adding the flour while it was mixing, waiting for it to come away from the edge. And this, I get it to about this, like it still needs more flour. This is a great time to hand it off to your kids. If it's too sticky, it's a train wreck. I normally hand it off about this stage, and if you have a bunch of kids, break it into chunks and let them each knead a chunk, and you can put it all back together, or you can make little loaves of bread. So you can knead, you're not gonna over knead this bread because it has the wheat flour in it. This develops the gluten and makes it more chewy, softer texture. So if you could do this for a full 6 to 8 minutes, you're gonna have a really tender bread.
Someone asked about the recipe again.
Okay, is there a way for you to get the recipe? Can I add my own comment to a live? I will make sure you get the recipe. And if you don't see it, DM me and I'll send it to you. It's already on my site, it's ready for you. And again, this recipe I'm making a half a batch. The one that my mom makes 4 loaves and this will make 2. Okay, do you see I've used up, my counter is pretty clean. I incorporated all of that flour. And how I know if it's done, do you see that? It kind of keeps it, but it's not sticking to my hands. But I'm gonna do a little bit more. If you can do 6 to 8 minutes, like I said, you're gonna get a really tender product. And I'm using my heels a lot, so if it starts sticking to the heels of my hand, I'm gonna just sprinkle on a little bit more. Like it's feeling too sticky. So that's probably only a tablespoon. But this is the perk of doing it by hand, is you can get a feel. Do you see how it's stuck to my hand a lot? That's a little bit too much sticking. Do you guys have any questions? Because you can do this for a long time. Quarter turn, and it was sticking. I'm going to do another tablespoon. This is just to help aid the process. And again, if you're using a stand mixer, this is when you would just be adding that flour and letting it mix. You are the mixer, or your kids are the mixer. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. You see how it's not sticking? Can you see the bread pretty good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you see how it's it'll stay tight, but it's a little bit soft? I wish that you could touch it. This is like a really, really nice dough. It's not too stiff. You can see my fingers in it, but it also, you can make it into a really nice ball. Do you see how it kind of keeps itself tight? That's when you know that it's ready.
Someone asked, did you use yeast?
Yes, this is a yeast bread recipe. This is not my sourdough. Okay, so, should we pick it up? What do you think? Okay, this is my bread, and you just put it in here and you're gonna cover it with a clean dish towel or saran wrap. And you want it to rise until about double, and people have questions about that, so I worked ahead. So double is not as huge as you think that it should be, especially if you used whole wheat flour. So this is about 1/3 whole wheat, 2/3 white. That's about my favorite ratio. So this bread has been done. This one's about 45 minutes out. I made it a little bit ago. So I'm gonna cover this guy and show you how to form the loaves with this. Finished rising. Okay, you have some options when it comes to pans. These are my favorite. They're 9x5 traditional bread pans, and I got them from my friend Lisa at Rove and Swig. She's a small business owner. If you were supporting people, she would appreciate it too. So, and then this one is slightly smaller. This one is even smaller. Use what you have. If it's glass, if it's metal, if it's enamel, you can use it. And the size of the loaf will just be slightly different shaped based on the pan that you use. So this little guy, it's gonna swell up a lot, and then even more. It's gonna look like a traditional loaf of bread with that fun top and the bottom like you think of. And this one will have a nice dome. And this one will be the shortest because it's the widest. Does that make sense? I think it does. Okay, I am going to use these two because I can. Most of the time I use my enamel ones because I just like them. You're just gonna spray them with cooking spray. You can also do a paper towel with the oil on it to grease the edges. You could do a stick of butter. Just get it greased so it comes out. Okay, those are ready. And then when you're ready to shape, my counter is still a little bit dirty. If yours was not, I would just super lightly dust. You don't need a lot of flour. And then put it on your hands. So you're gonna take it out. And I put it upside down. And it doesn't matter. This is just nuances of how I've done it. And I get all of it out. No point in leaving bread behind. And then I'm really not trying to smash it because it's already worked hard to rise once and I don't want to deflate all of the air. I'm gonna grab a knife. So this is kind of a uniform shape, it's a little bit square so that I can get a nice half. If you want to be very particular, you can weigh your dough pieces. I don't care that much. So when I shape it, I fold in the ends and fold in the middles, and then I kind of rock it. And do you see how I use the counter to pull it against itself? Does that make sense? And then I roll it a little bit, and then you pat it till it's like a little baby. That's what I do to shape my loaf, and then I pick it up and put it in my bread pan. And you can re-pat it if you want. So this one the same. So I tuck my ends a little bit. I kind of use the counter to pull it. And then it has a seam and I roll it onto the seam. And this just takes some practice. I made many an ugly loaf before I made pretty ones. So these are in the pans. And again, you can pick a time, you can pick an amount of rising. It doesn't really matter. My other ones, I'm still 6 minutes away, but I might pull them out and show you. Because I do have some in my oven even. So these, it'll fill up the pan nicely. A general rule of thumb is to bake it when it's 1 inch over the edge, but this one, it doesn't fill up all the way. So I would say when this one is even with the top, and when this one is slightly above the top, and when the smaller pan is 1 inch above the top, that's when you can know to bake it. Or you can just say, I'm gonna let them sit for 45 minutes, or 1 hour, or 1 hour and 15 minutes, and then you can bake them. You bake them at 350 for about 35 minutes. And the trick to know when bread is done is my mom always tapped it, and if it sounds hollow, that's when you know it's done baking. Okay, do you wanna, all the dirty parts that I hid from you are in between the oven.
It'll be
It's
TV.
okay, people, here's the real life in between. Okay, These still have, ooh, see how pretty they are? And they don't sound hollow. They sound like they still got something there. And they're not very dark, but they're gonna be beautiful.